lot of us have different things floating around in our heads all the time, whether it's our spouses, our jobs, our kids, our in-laws, where we're going on vacation, if the lawn needs to be mowed, and how many bills we have to pay. But as GMs, we have even more going on in our heads in relation to our world, our story that we're working together with the PCs to create. My name is Mike, and this is the GM's Vault. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a few prep tricks to decrease some of that cognitive strain on your brain during a game. How you can better prepare and improvise during the game. So let's go to the vault and see what we can find today. So how as GMs do we reduce some of that load on the RAM inside of our brains? Like a computer, we only have a certain amount of storage before it just doesn't fit anymore. So I'm going to give you 4 basic ways on how you can use your prepping to increase your ability to improvise on the fly during your sessions. The first way is to over-prep your world. I have always been a big proponent of over-prepping your world, but not necessarily your plot. So what do I mean by that? I typically do homebrew sessions, and the reason why I do a homebrew versus a prepared module or adventure path is when you're doing an adventure path, as example, a lot of times you'll have to read through the entire thing in order to get the gist of what's going on. Sometimes you'll have to go through it even multiple times to know the NPCs, the encounters, the situations, the plot hooks, like the back of your hand. The reason I like homebrew games versus that is that I can start small and I can work my way out as the players go out and explore the world and the stories and the plots that I put in front of them. And I can prep those as they come versus having to download everything all at the very beginning. So how I start out is I will go to Pinterest or do a Google image search for RPG town or RPG city map, Dungeons and Dragons map, any of those kind of things, to find a map of a town that I think is the appropriate size of what I want to start with. I typically don't start with a very small village, and I don't start with a major city either. Somewhere in between, a smaller town, usually about 500 to 1,000 people. So I will go and I will find an image of a map that I think fits that description. I will print out that map, and then I will put numbers over some of the major buildings inside this city. And each of those numbers are going to correspond to the butcher shop, the wagon right, a cafe or a tavern, the city garrison, those kind of things. Then I will come up with the names for that specific tavern or shop or inn inside that particular city. The easy way to do the names for taverns and inns and shops, you can go to fantasynamegenerators.com, which is a great website for all kinds of things that you need to name in your game. Or quite simply, the easiest way to do it is to use an adjective or an adverb and a noun. So for example, in the town where most of my PCs start off in my campaigns, we have things like the brass trident, the happy garden, the singing frog. All of those kind of names are very easy to come up with on the fly. For example, you can use the whimpering unicorn or the cowardly tortoise as a name for a tavern or a shop. Once you have the names of all the specific buildings in your town, or the major ones anyway, you're not going to do every single house inside of a town, but all the major businesses in town, then you're going to want to come up with the NPCs to populate those businesses. Basically how I do it is, again, I will go to Pinterest or do a Google image search to find images or portraits of characters. Inside the description of this video, I'll put a link to my Pinterest account. You can certainly go there and search. I've got thousands upon thousands upon thousands of character portraits, images on my Pinterest account. You can feel free to download any of those, print them off, and do the same kind of system that I use. So I can show this to the players as they're going and talking to various NPCs. I also put an index card in the back behind there, and I have the NPC's name on the top, and I have information on the back about that particular NPC for me personally. Basically, when you're creating NPCs to populate your specific town or city, there's 7 basic things that you want to look at to easily make your NPCs. First of all is finding the picture. Again, you can go to fantasynamegenerators.com to pick out a name. They can that website is excellent. They have names for dwarven names, elven names, gnomish names, evil wizard names, whatever you want to name your NPC as. The third thing out of 7 is you want to do their race, their class, and their sex. Typically, a tavern owner in a small town is not going to have a class per se, but if your NPCs are out traveling through the forest, they come across a ranger or a hunter, then you would want to include the class in your NPC information behind the picture. The next 2 things are, what do they want and what do they fear? And let's take Olivia for an example. She is a tavern owner in the small town where the PCs started. Maybe she wants to be comfortable. She wants to make enough money with her business that she can hire more employees and take more of a back seat to her business and still be making very good money. So what does she fear? Perhaps Olivia is a clean freak and she fears someone getting sick from the food in her tavern, so she's constantly cleaning. That's a good way of making an NPC more alive in your game. So after wants and fears, then you want to give them some kind of a quirk. It doesn't have to be something major. It can be something small. Maybe they're missing an eye. Maybe they speak with a mumble. Maybe they're missing part of their leg and they have a peg leg, or they have a parrot on their shoulder, or a kitten, for example. Give them some little tiny quirk and write that on the back of the picture that you had printed out. And that will again help bring them alive, make the PCs remember the NPC better. The 7th thing about the easy way of making NPCs is to give them a voice. Taliesin Jaffe did a Q&A with Satine Phoenix, and he talked about using the 7 dwarves method of giving your NPC a memorable voice without having to do a silly accent, whether it's a French accent or German, Russian, Scottish, or Australian even. Let's take another NPC from town, for example, the overweight banker. Maybe he has a grumpy voice. So the 7 dwarves again, of course, grumpy, doc, dopey, sneezy. So maybe the overweight banker has a grumpy voice. It's going to be a grumpy male voice with low tones. So even though he's describing the best birthday party that he's ever had, there was lots of balloons and everyone came with lots of presents, he still sounds grumpy. That's an easy way of doing accents, and a very easy way of remembering it, just writing grumpy male low on the back of his particular picture. So we've talked about how to name the taverns, how to do the NPCs for easy reference and always remembering them, getting them the exact same way. The next thing is we'll talk about how to design towns themselves. Recently, I was watching another YouTube video from Daryl Kingsmill, and she did an absolutely excellent job of describing everything that you would want to put in a town or a city, even a very small village. The acronym is very silly, but it's very easy to remember. SPERM, SPERM. So in every single town, you want to have a social center to the town, you want to have a political center to the town, an economic center, a religious center, and some kind of militaristic or protection kind of feature to the town itself. Even if you're talking about a very small village with a really low population, when you do that SPERM acronym, your social aspect of the town may be the only tavern or inn in the town. That's where everyone from town congregates to talk about the events of the day, the news, those kind of things, the weather. Your political aspect in a very small village, let's say they don't have an appointed or an elected official in town, but the tavern owner is very social, very amiable. He seems very wise. And so maybe he's kind of the de facto leader of the town, the de facto mayor. So that's your social and political. An economic factor in your town, if that's a very small village, maybe it's a small fishing village, and the economic hub of the town is the single dock that they have. So many of the people in town are fishermen. They're bringing in fish and seafood, and that's how they make their living. The religious center of the town could be a very small temple in the town. Maybe it's a level 1 cleric. Maybe he's not even a cleric. Maybe he's just a devout follower of a certain god or goddess, and he's the one providing spiritual guidance for the entire town. In a small village, maybe they don't have a city guard, they don't have a constable, but they do have a huntsman or a guide that takes people out on the hunt, and he's the closest thing that they would have to a constable or a sheriff in town. He's basically the lawman in town. When you talk about going up to a much larger city, these 5 aspects are not going to be a single individual or a single building. They're going to be whole districts, blocks of area within a large city. So when you're talking about the social district of a town, that's where you're going to find a lot of taverns and inns. Maybe it's the city square where they have people that give large speeches, and they have festivals and things like that in the town square. That would be a good social district. A political district would be if there's a city hall. That would be things like if there's a hall of records, as example. Any place that people will go to do things politically would be a great example of a political district. The economic district is, again, we're going to be where all your shops are at. You're going to have the magic users. You're going to have all the places you could buy used books and trinkets, and perhaps even artisans and craftsmen that make furniture and pottery and things like that. Your religious district in a large city is going to be a row of temples and cathedrals to all the major gods within your world. Your military district is going to be home to the city garrison. Granted, you will have city guard throughout the city and posted at the gates of the city, but the city garrison is going to be your military center within a town. So again, when you're creating a town, just make sure you have all 5 of those: social, political, economic, religious, and military in your town, no matter the size. So that's how you basically over prepare your world. And the reason that you do that is so in game you already know who the owner of the apothecary is. You already know who the Lord Mayor of the town is. You know who the captain of the guard is. You don't have to take time during your game to look up a name or maybe look up a picture or just trying to describe somebody off the top of your head. You already have all that information. You know what they want, you know what they fear, you know what their quirks are, and you know how they talk. It's very simple and easier to do that way. It makes it so much easier to improvise during the game if you already know all the information. So the next thing that I want to talk about in making your games better and thinking faster on your feet is when you are going to describe a building or a person or a room to your party, it's better if you've already got an image on paper or you've seen or at least an image in your head. The human mind is very visual, and it's much easier for us to describe an image to the players than it is a smell or a sound or a taste. So what I do is I will always do a Pinterest or Google search again for certain buildings, rooms that have the kind of feel or ambiance that I want to go with in the game. For example, my players in the next session are going to be visiting an old cathedral to a dead god that has been converted into more of a manufacturing kind of building. They just used an old cathedral as opposed to building a whole new building. So I found this image on Pinterest and I did a search for cathedrals. I thought this one was nice. It's not a huge cathedral, it's fairly small. But after seeing this picture, it's much easier for me to describe to my players the brick, the red, bright red brick that's kind of falling apart on this cathedral, and the stained glass windows, and the bright green of the grass in the graveyard, and the old tombstones that are out in front of the building. It's easier for me to describe that if I can see it. I might even show them the picture of this particular cathedral so that they can see what I'm talking about and not have to rely on my description of it. But if I've seen a picture of it, it's easier for me to describe. And that goes the same with talking about the physical description of an NPC as well. So again, use imagery to picture the things in advance of your game, and it's easier for you to describe them on the fly. If you're talking about a library, you can talk about the wall-to-wall, all the shelves of all the books, and you can talk about the leather bindings, and you can talk about the half-burned candles in the rooms and all that kind of thing. So the third thing to help your improvising by prepping ahead of time is to use tables and generators. Now this is more in-game. When I'm GMing myself, I have a laptop right next to me, and I usually have multiple tabs already open. I have the SRD of the game system that I'm running, so if I have to look up a specific spell, its effects and duration, those kind of things, or the price of a backpack, I can look that up easily online. So that's one tab that I have open. I also have some tabs open to fantasynamegenerator.com. Maybe they come across an NPC that I didn't foresee. I don't have a picture of them. I don't have a name for them. I can easily pop something up. Primarily what I use a table or a generator for in-game is meals at a tavern. It's one thing that I never prep out. I actually have a table of 100 different meals that PCs can have at a tavern. Oftentimes I'll have the PCs just roll a percentile dice, and 1 or 2 or 3 different choices, that's what they have to eat at that particular tavern that evening. If you do a search on Reddit or on Pinterest, you can find so many different tables. 100 different things that you will find when you pickpocket somebody. Hundreds of different curses, things that you'll find on the side of the road, non-magical loot. All these kind of things you can easily find a chart or a table online. Anything that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and save it, print it out, whatever, and have it easily available during the game. Those are things that don't really impact the story so much. They're not going to impact a certain way a player character will act. You know, whether they're getting stew or whether they're getting roast duck or whatever at the tavern is really not going to make a huge difference in the game. So I use those typically for non-essential things. So the final thing that you can do as far as your prep to make things easier for you during the game is to take good session notes. Now, typically what I have in front of me, I don't have, we showed the player binders, but as a GM, I do not have a huge binder that sits in front of me. I have it, it's right over there, but it's not sitting right in front of me during the game. What do I have with me during the game is I will have stat blocks of any monsters or villains that the party will encounter during the game. I have the map, I have the NPCs listed. I have a chart that lists everyone's passive scores for all of their skills, their AC, their hit points, all that kind of stuff for the PCs all on one sheet. So that way I can know their passive perception skill easily just by looking at the chart. I can know their stealth score, I can know their AC and the hit points, all that kind of stuff. So I have that, and then I have session notes. And I'm only going to show this very briefly because this is the actual session notes for the next session for one of my campaigns, and a notebook. So the session notes I have broken down into the most likely places that the PCs will be traveling or want to go visit during a session. This next session, they're in a town, so I listed the 5 main places, the 5 most important places where they're going to be gaining information. I'm going to talk in my session notes about who they could meet there and the information that they could get at that particular location from the main NPC or another NPC. These could be rumors, these could be quest missions, they could deal with character backstory. Maybe a PC meets their uncle or their sister or something in a particular location. And then as I'm taking very detailed notes during the session of what happens, if the players are given information off of my session notes, I put a check mark to know that they found that particular piece of information. And I try to get them to find all of the information on my session notes. If they go to one place and they ask the wrong question, or the NPC, meaning the GM, forgets to give that particular information, now I know that when they go to the next place or the next place, I have to somehow work that information in so that they can get all the information that they need. So basically, when you take very good session notes, that's the new prep. That's like orange is the new black. Taking good session notes is the good prep. And so after the game, I use a program called Campaign Logger. And that's at campaign-logger.com, I believe. Again, I'll put the link for that in the description. But that's very nice because I can tag names, I can tag places, I can tag sessions and plot hooks all in my campaign logger. And then that way at the end of the session, when I'm going through and filling everything out, if there's a question or if I'm prepping for the next session and I know that they're going to go to this certain place and talk to a certain NPC, I can just click on that NPC's name and it brings up all the interactions that the PCs have had with that NPC up until this point. So, for example, they go to a town, there's a butcher's daughter that makes some romantic advances toward a PC, and that PC basically rebuffs her. If they go back to that town again 6-8 months later and talk to that same butcher, that butcher is going to remember, hey, that's the a-hole that he was too good for my daughter, and those kind of things. So it's very fun to be able to remember what actually happened a long time ago. If the PCs can forget, it's easy for the GM to forget too if they're not taking very good session notes. So those are the 4 big ways to make things easier to improv by using good session prep in your games. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this episode, give us a like, click the subscribe button, and stay tuned for more cool GM tips from the Game Master's Vault.
What's going to be your fun little teaser at the end? What are you gonna?
You're just gonna have to wait 2 seconds. All right, so a lot of information crammed in an episode again, and that's all I got for today. I have to go train the new troll intern, so see ya, nerds.